Happy Independence Day! And this is Walt Disney's Ben and Me. If you ever visit the fair city of Philadelphia, very likely you will see a fine statue of Benjamin Franklin, philosopher, inventor, patriot, and one of our country's first great leaders. And if you are fortunate enough to have a good view of the crown of the statue's hat, you may see there a tiny statue of one Amos mouse. It was Amos, you see, who was really responsible for many of the great deeds credited to Ben Franklin. Here's the story in Amos's own words. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, in the old church on 2nd Street, and yes, I was as poor as a church mouse. There were 26 children in my family. Since I was the oldest, I decided to set out onto the world and make my own way. It was the winter of 1745. Jobs were scarce, especially for a mouse. All day I tramped through the snow. By nightfall, I did not know where to turn. My last hope was an old run-down shop at the edge of town. A sign over the door read, Benj Franklin, Printer and Bookbinder. I found my way inside. The place was cold and dark and full of strange contraptions. In the shadows sat a round-faced man trying to write by candlelight. Suddenly he sneezed. Achoo! Off flew his glasses. They crashed to the floor and broke. Oh, don't tell me, cried the man, picking up his broken glasses. My last pair. Now I'll never get this issue of my newspaper finished. It's hopeless. But you can't give up, I told him. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Mr. Franklin. My name's Ben, he said, and who might you be? I introduced myself, and before long it was clear that Ben needed me around. I helped him build a stove to warm his shop, and I fixed his glasses. He had broken both his outdoor pair and his reading pair. The only thing left to do was to make one pair out of the two. So I fit the pieces of glass together as best I could. Why, Amos, he cried when he tried them on. They're great, two-way glasses. Bifocals, we'll call them. And if you know your history, of course, you know that bifocals became famous. I also helped Ben finish the latest issue of his newspaper and gave him tips to make it more interesting. By evening the next day, everyone in Philadelphia was reading it. From then on, I went everywhere with Ben, writing conveniently on his hat. Well, the years went by, and Ben's reputation grew. Letters poured in from people all over the colonies. They asked his advice on all kinds of things. It took most of my spare time to answer them all. Meanwhile, Ben puttered around with his experiments, and it was one of them that led us at last to the parting of our ways. At first, he fussed around with sparks and jars with wires in them. He said he was studying electricity. Then Ben took up kite flying. To the framework of his largest kite, he fastened a small box just for me. He said I was to be the world's first flying reporter. I was so thrilled by flying that I failed to notice a sharp pointed wire fastened to the kite above my head. The first hint I had that anything was wrong was when the sky darkened with thunderclouds and a mean rain began to blow. The kite spun and shivered, but Ben would not pull me in. I screamed myself hoarse. I tugged at the rope. Now lightning was flashing along the horizon. Thunder rolled. The storm was moving our way. Suddenly, lightning struck my kite. The shock went through me and almost tore the kite to ribbons. Now, too late, Ben began to wind in his rope. The kite and I slowly descended and landed in a tree. When Ben found us there, he scooped me up in one hand. "Amos, Amos, speak to me," he cried. "Was it electricity?" I couldn't believe it. All he cared about was whether or not the sizzle of the lightning bolt was the same as electricity. That was the end for me. "Goodbye forever," I said. He pleaded with me to change my mind, but I left Ben and went back to my family in the old church. The years that followed were troubled ones. Restless crowds filled the streets. There were riots, as well as loud talk against the Stamp Act and other taxes for the British king. Ben was chosen to go to England and lay our case before the king. The colonies eagerly awaited his return, but his mission was a failure. The king would not listen. It seemed as if war would surely come. But the people had no clear statement of their cause to hold them together. I heard that poor Ben was worried. I could help him. I knew I could. But no, I could not go back. After all, a mouse has his pride. Then, one night in 1776, I was awakened by a voice. Sleepily, I peered through the mouse hole. There, on bended knee, was Ben Franklin himself. "Amos, I'm here to ask you to come back," he said humbly. I was pleased and touched, but I did not let him see it. "I have big decisions to make," Ben continued, "and I can't make them alone. You just must come back." "On my own terms?" I asked. "If I draw up an agreement, will you sign it?" "I'll sign anything," he vowed. So, back I went, having spent the night writing the agreement by candlelight. Ben was glad to see me the next morning, you may be sure. I gave him my agreement to sign at once. That was when a knock came on the door. It was Thomas Jefferson. He was one of the leaders of the colonies too, and Ben called him Red. He was writing a statement about what the colonists believe in, a Declaration of Independence. But struggle as he would, Red could not get the beginning right. "The time has come," Red began to read, but then he stopped. "No, Ben, it isn't right. The time is at hand." "No." "Ben," I said, when I saw how upset Red was. "How about our contract?" "Shh," said Ben, "just a minute." "No," I insisted, "now." So Ben began to read the contract aloud. "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary—" "Ben!" cried Red Jefferson. "That's it! That's it!" So that's how it happened that I supplied the beginning for the Declaration of Independence. Oh, I didn't get credit, of course, but fame doesn't matter to a mouse. I have my memories of the good old days of Ben and me.